The train crawled across the Kansas prairie like a tired iron beetle, breath hissing, wheels clacking, a rhythm that crept into the bones. When the cars sighed to a halt at the small station, dust rose in a slow veil and met the hot blue of the sky. Anna stepped down with a carpetbag and a shawl that had known kinder winters. Her shoes were thin. Her heart was thinner, but it kept time as if the engine inside her would not give up. Passengers drifted off with quick boots and quick plans. A boy rolled a barrel. A woman adjusted a bonnet and did not meet Anna's eyes. At the far end, a telegraph key tapped its tiny code. A distant insect of news. Anna watched the track vanish toward the east, where a past she did not want was running to catch her. She had left behind a letter, a ring in a tin by the stove, and a bruise that had almost faded. She had left behind a name she would no longer answer. The town was little more than 2 stores, a livery, and a church whose paint peeled in curls like shavings. Beyond that stretched a tawny sea of grass broken by cottonwoods that rattled like paper. The wind never forgot its chores. It carried dust, heat, and the faint scent of cattle. Anna stood still and let it move around her as if it might carry her somewhere else for free. A wagon rattled by, with a man and a little girl. The man had the lean shape of a fence post and the quiet eyes of someone who had counted losses. The girl held a rag doll and watched the stranger with the open curiosity of 7 summers. Anna lowered her face and began to walk. She passed hitching rails and talk that did not belong to her. She took a path between tall grass that hissed against her skirt. Grasshoppers sprang like sparks and clung to her hem. A hawk turned in the clean light. The land opened until her breath seemed to disappear into it. She felt small, and yet the smallness had its own freedom. By late afternoon, she found a fence and a gate held with a loop of rope. Beyond it lay a yard, a dog asleep in shade, a ranch house with a low porch, and a barn whose boards were the color of old blood. She stood at the gate and watched the dog not lift its head. The wind tapped the post like a knuckle. Anna eased the loop and slipped through. No one called out. The house windows stared like cool eyes. The barn waited with mouth open, sweet with hay and the darker scent of animals and labor. She crossed the yard as if she were nightfall. Inside the barn, the air was gentle and speckled with slow dust. Swallows had stitched their nests high in the rafters. Anna set down her bag and listened. In the quiet, she heard the sound of her hunger. She pressed a hand to her middle and smiled. A tired smile at the simple fact that she still could. She found an empty stall with a heap of straw, a loose board, and a ladder to a loft. She climbed, spread her shawl, and lay still. Through a gap in the roof, a square of sky looked back like a faded plate. Night would come with coyotes. Morning would come with roosters. She told herself she would be gone by then, a seed on the coat of wind. Dawn came thin and gray, and with it the barn woke. A milk cow shifted, chains clinked. A horse blew a warm breath that smelled of grass turned sweet. Anna sat up in the loft and peered through the gap. A man crossed the yard with a pail in each hand. He moved like someone who did not waste steps. The dog trotted at his heel and did not bark. Anna slid down the ladder and stood behind the stallboard. Her fingers worried the hem of her dress. She told herself that if he found her, she would speak plain and hope for grace. Footsteps came. Straw whispered under his boots. He was the man from the wagon. Close, he looked older than she had guessed by a few winters, the kind that came from weather and worry. He set the pails down, lifted a pitchfork, and turned hay with steady strokes. The air filled with the green ghost of last summer. He paused, head tilted, the way a deer listens. "You can come out if you are set on hiding," he said, voice quiet as the barn. "I would like to see who shares breakfast with my cows." Anna stepped into the light and kept her hands at her sides. "I am only passing through," she said. "I will work to pay for a corner of floor and be gone before trouble comes." The man studied her face, then the bag, then the thin shawl. "Trouble," he said, "belongs to anyone who invites it. I am not in the habit of inviting it." He looked toward the house as if a clock were ticking there. "What is your name?" "Anna," she said. "Just Anna." "Thomas," he said at last. "This place was my wife's and mine. She rests on the hill with the cedars. I keep it for her and for the girl. As if called, the child from the wagon appeared in the doorway, hair in a sleepy braid, boots on the wrong feet. She saw Anna and smiled with a bright ease that hurt. I knew someone was here, she said. Father, can she stay? Thomas did not look at his daughter. He kept his eyes on Anna, as if reading a ledger where loss and promise were written. There is no spare money, he said. Strangers bring questions. The girl took his sleeve and tugged twice, an earnest plea. She is thin, Clara said. The wind will take her if we do not weigh her with food. His mouth did not soften, but his shoulders changed. Dropping a little under a weight he seemed to accept. A day, he said. Help with chores and move on when the sun goes down tomorrow. If any hard men ride this way asking, I will not lie for you. If none ride, I will point to the road. Thank you, Anna said. The words tasted like water. Thomas handed her a bucket. The pump is by the cottonwoods. The kettle wants filling. If you are staying one day, make it a useful day. Clara skipped beside Anna to the yard where the pump handle stuck like an old arm. Together they worked the iron until cold water leapt and splashed their wrists. The girl said that the pump liked new hands. Anna smiled before she knew it, and for a moment, the sun sat warmer on her shoulders. Morning grew into a day of work that left no room for speeches. Thomas led a bay mare to the creek and checked the shoes. Anna swept the porch until the boards showed their grain like gentle rivers. Clara followed both with a handful of questions and the solemn air of someone keeping score. At noon, the heat spread low across the yard. Grasshoppers rasped in the weeds. Anna stood at the stove and learned where the pan liked to sit and how the fire took its breath. She baked cornbread that held together and fried salt pork until the kitchen smelled like a memory from better houses. She cut 2 apples thin enough to share among 3. Thomas washed at the basin, eyes fixed on the water as if it were a story that might turn. He ate without praise, but he did not leave a single crumb. In the afternoon, a cloud built on the far line, where earth and sky married in a straight vow. The light dimmed. Wind began to run, quick and restless, tugging at clothes on the line and stirring grit from the yard. Thomas looked up once, read the cloud, and moved like a man who had done this many times. He sent Clara to gather eggs, closed the chicken run, and told Anna to bring the washing in before the sky turned to a gray drum. They worked faster than talk. The first fat drops hit the dust and wrote dark circles that bled into each other. The smell of wet earth was so strong it made Anna dizzy, as if the land were making promises all at once. Thunder rolled across the pasture. Thomas swung the barn doors tight and set the iron bar. Clara ran in laughing, hair wild, apron full of warm eggs that clicked together like small stones. When the rain found its full voice, the world narrowed to the barn. Lanterns hung from nails and widened small islands of gold. Animals shifted and blew, calm with the old knowledge that storms come and go. Anna and Clara sat on overturned buckets and shelled peas into a pan. Thomas checked the harness, ran his palm along each leather strap as if it were a living thing that trusted him. He did not speak much. The barn spoke enough for everyone. Clara asked Anna where she had come from. Anna said from back east. Clara asked if that was farther than the river. Anna said it was many rivers, but this one here mattered most now. Clara nodded as if this were a fine answer and tucked a pea into her pocket for the doll to eat later. Thomas glanced at Anna once and again, and the second glance held no judgment, only a steady taking in of fact. Toward evening, the rain softened. A coolness crept in behind it, and the dust settled like a tamed thing. They ate by lantern at the little table, the chimney glass smudged with the smoke of many nights. After supper, Clara wrote her name with a wet finger on the tabletop, and Anna showed her another way to shape the letters. Thomas watched the curve of hand and the patient small voice. He said that if Anna stayed one more day, there was fence to mend and a calf to doctor. One more day, Anna answered. She did not say the rest, that the one more day she had taken in her mind seemed to have spread roots when the rain touched the earth. The storm left the prairie, rinsed and quiet. 3 mornings later, the cottonwoods held drops like little mirrors in the early sun. Anna walked with Clara to the pasture fence, where a calf stood with its head through the wires, puzzled by the trap it had made. Thomas came with nippers and a patient look. He worked the wire loose, and the calf stumbled free, surprised, as if the world had forgiven it. "You were meant for a place," Thomas said without looking up, "and still you find yourself between two kinds of trouble." He patted the calf and turned to the fence. Anna felt the words pass through her, as if he had seen her with her head between wires too, caught by hunger on one side and fear on the other. After supper, they sat on the porch steps with the kitchen lamp behind them, and the scent of dishwater cooling in the pan. Crickets sang like 1,000 wee saws. The dog lay across the threshold as if it had learned that Anna belonged to the pattern of the yard. Clara drowsed against Anna's arm and murmured about school. Thomas rested his elbows on his knees and watched the shape of the land melt into night. "I will not camp in your barn forever," Anna said. "I did not mean to camp even one night. I came by the train. I was to be a wife in a house far from here. I sent letters to a man in a town with a name I cannot say without tasting iron. He wrote many promises. When I arrived, the promises were not there. His hand was." She paused. "I ran before the sun and bought a ticket for the first westbound. I took a new way of saying my name from the conductor and kept walking when the train stopped." Thomas did not ask for the old name. He did not ask for the way the hand had fallen. He simply took in the tale and held it where he held other hard things. He said that he had once written to a doctor as if a letter could lift a fever, but it could not. His wife, Mary, had gone thin as a blade in a dry year, and one dusk he had watched the light on her face leave the room like a slow bird. He had kept the ranch by habit since then. And for the girl, Clara stirred, half asleep, and asked if her mother could see the lanterns from the hill. Thomas said that the hill saw everything that mattered. He lifted the child in his arms without a grunt, as if grief had left him strong in the strangest places. He carried her inside and laid her down. The lamp made a quiet halo on the table. Anna stayed on the steps and folded her hands tight. The stars were crowded and cold. A train called somewhere on the far dark line. She realized she did not carry only fear. Now, she carried the weight of being believed, a more merciful burden than she had expected. Thomas came back out and sat again. He did not speak for a long breath. At last he said that men who strike what is gentle have no claim on the land or on heaven. If any man came asking, he would be answered. He did not say how. He did not need to. Work stitched the days together so neatly that Anna almost forgot to count them. She learned the geography of the yard by the path her feet liked. The well handle made a soft click at the top of each pole. The kitchen window framed a square of pasture that changed shade with each hour. Thomas's hat hung on the same peg that had held Mary's shawl, and now Anna's shawl shared it when the wind rose. They mended fence along the creek where willows bent and trailed their hair in the current. The water talked a long patient talk over stones, and Clara tossed pebbles to hear the answers. Thomas showed Anna how to wrap the wire, how to pull until it sang, how to take hold without tearing skin. Their fingers brushed at the handoff of tools. The touch was nothing, and then it was something. A small spark that did not need witness. At the noonday rest, they sat in a wedge of shade. Anna watched dragonflies stitch blue threads through the warm air. Thomas passed her a canteen and told her that the creek would shrink by August, that the cottonwoods would show a pale side in the hard light, that the coyotes would circle wider as the ground went dry. He spoke of these things as if they were kin he respected more than he liked. His voice had the same slow honesty. She found it restful to listen. Clara tugged Anna's sleeve and asked for a story about a city street. Anna told of a winter morning when the river froze and men dragged ice to sawdust barns, and the sound of horses striking sparks off the stones. She told of church bells and baker's air, and a crowd at a train as a soldier went away. She did not tell the hard parts. She gave Clara the music, and kept the sorrow folded. Thomas slung the fence pliers at his hip and walked the line. Anna followed with staples. They spoke little, but the silence felt made, not empty, like a loaf that had risen right. When a rattler lifted its head from beneath a clump of sage, Thomas stepped between Anna and the strike without thought and sent it away with a long stick, and a curse hissed through his teeth. After, he looked almost shy and said that snakes liked the same sun people liked, which was not their fault. Anna took his wrist and felt the quick, strong beat, and he let that touch stay. That night, she brushed Clara's hair by lantern and told her that hair grows best when it hears kind stories. The child laughed and asked the hair to grow like river grass. Thomas paused in the doorway, held there by a moment he did not want to break. He went on to the porch and sat with the dog while the night stood up around the house like a calm animal. The wind shifted. Somewhere a coyote threw its thin voice at the moon, and no one answered. Anna stepped to the doorway and watched Thomas tip his head back to read the stars the way some men read ledgers. She stood beside him and did not speak. The space between their sleeves was a narrow road, and both of them were already walking it. The first sign came with a stranger at the well, who asked for water and left behind a rumor. He had a face turned brown by miles, and a coat that held more road than cloth. While he drank, he watched the yard too carefully, counting with his eyes. He said he had heard of a man riding west, angry as a wasp nest split with a stick, looking for a bride who had forgotten her vow. The stranger grinned without warmth, thanked Anna for the dipper, and went on with his mule. Thomas listened without moving his mouth. He walked to the porch and took his rifle down to clean it, each piece set on a cloth like a prayer laid out one word at a time. Clara watched with interest until Thomas sent her to fetch eggs from the barn. When she was gone, he said that angry men run at first and think after, and that thinking men were the ones to fear. 2 days later, a rider in a fine coat stopped at the gate. His horse was foam bright, his boots oiled, his hat a city shape. He asked if a woman had passed this way, traveling alone, pale, a touch taller than most, with the look of someone who had lied. Thomas leaned on the top rail and said the prairie made all faces pale, and that a man should mind his words when a child was listening. The rider smiled without eyes. He tipped his hat to Clara and left a card with a careful name burned into it by printer's ink. Then he rode away with the look of someone who would circle back. That night, Thomas stowed feed barrels in front of the back door. Not enough to draw notice in the morning, enough to slow a boot. Anna cut strips of old cloth and wrapped them around the lantern chimneys to dull the glow. She felt the old fear rise and try to spread its roots, but the ground inside her had changed. Work and kindness had taken so much space that fear had to squeeze to fit. They spoke low by the cold stove. Thomas told her that lawmen were thin on the ground and that neighbors were far, and that a man who meant harm could do it if he came with others and with the night. He said he would send her to the widow Booth for a time, who kept 2 sons and 3 milk cows and a scattergun beside the flour barrel. Anna said that running again would turn her back into a ghost. She wanted to stand where she had planted. Clara woke from a dream and stood in the doorway, hair a little wild. She said that a wolf had tried to take the doll, and that the doll had bitten it on the ear. Thomas bent and promised the wolf would find no supper here. He lifted her and set her back in bed, and for a moment Anna saw in his hands what it meant to make a house safe. In the following days, the yard kept its tasks, but watchfulness sharpened the edges. Thomas walked the fence line at dusk with the dog and came back slow, checking the sky for dust. Anna made bread and set it to rise in a warm place, as if preparing for guests she did not want. When a train sounded far off at night, all 3 woke at once, and then lay still, each listening to the breath of the others, measuring the peace they were trying to hold. It happened on a day with light so clean it made edges sharp. The sky had bleached to a pale bowl, and the grass lay flat under a wind shaved close. Anna was at the corral mending a halter. Clara was teaching the doll to curtsy. Thomas was in the far pasture, moving cattle toward the creek. The dog's head came up first. Then the dust plume showed on the eastern track, carrying men like beads on a string. By the time Thomas saw them and turned his horse, the riders were at the gate. 4, with the neat man from the cart among them. His eyes found Anna as if hooked to her by wire. He stepped down slow, like a gentleman arriving at his own porch, and called her another name, the old one that tasted like iron. He said she was bound to him by law and by marks in a book. The sheriff was a friend, the preacher a cousin. Anna stood with the halter rope in her hands and said that the book could keep its marks and that God was not a chain. The neat man told the men with him to search. Clara moved behind Anna and held her skirt. One man slapped the barn door with the palm. One circled the house. One looked toward the pasture and the rider coming hard. Thomas came at a gallop, hat low. He slid to a stop that threw dust high and stepped down with the rifle clear. His voice was steady. "This is my place, and my answer," he said. "And any claim must pass through me first." The neat man half turned and smiled, but there was sweat at his temple now. He said he could pay for the woman with money or with a paper if that was what a widower liked. Thomas said that offers were for markets, and he was no market. He looked at Clara, then at Anna, and in the space between looks, Anna felt something pass from him to her and back again, like a line thrown and caught. He told the men to mount up and carry their trouble away. The shortest of the men made a mistake of pride. He spat near Thomas's boot, and his hand moved. Thomas's rifle spoke once, a crack that tore the clean day. The man sat hard, shock more than hurt, and his gun slid into the dust. Birds rose from the cottonwoods in a sudden flutter and settled again. The neat man's smile broke. "The law will come," he said. Thomas said he would be here. He did not raise the rifle again. He only stood in the center of his yard. The men weighed the odds, looked at the quiet way Anna held the child, and one by one chose to be elsewhere. They turned their horses. The neat man was last. He bent close as he passed and told Anna that a woman could only run in a circle and that circles always close. Anna answered that some circles are fences that keep good things in. Then he was a streak of dark on the pale road. He did not look back. Thomas exhaled and sat on the porch step all at once. His hands were steady, but his face showed the cost. Anna brought water. Clara stood very straight and told the doll that brave could be quiet. The wind eased. The edges of the world softened, and the day began again with a different name. The next morning had a strained stillness, like the pause after a hymn when the last note hangs and will not let go. The yard bore small marks of what had happened, prints stamped deep near the gate, a dropped cartridge glinting by the porch step, a rope fallen where someone had thought to tie and then had not. The dog sniffed each sign and then lay down with a sigh, as if to say the story was told already. Thomas rode to the Booth place before noon to speak plain about what might come. He left Anna with a list of small tasks that felt too neat for the day. She folded sheets and found her fingers counting when her mind would not settle. Clara collected feathers from the chicken yard and arranged them by color like river stones. She did not ask many questions. When Thomas returned, he had dust on his boots and a new crease between his eyes. The widow Booth sent a jar of pickled peaches and a message that he was not the only one who could hold a shotgun straight. He set the jar on the table and kissed Clara's hair and looked at Anna long enough that both of them had to look away. He said no law came down the road, and that might be the end of it, but men had long memories when pride was bruised. They mended what could be mended. Thomas reset the loosened hinge on the barn door and replaced the broken latch. Anna swept the porch twice and carried the grit into the wind. Clara watered the bean rows until their leaves shone. Work kept fear at a distance, the way a lantern keeps dark pressed to the corners. At sundown, a rider came, but it was only Jonah Pike, who ran cattle south of the river. He leaned on the saddle horn and said he had heard there was a scuffle and that folks at the store were nodding but not saying much. He asked Thomas if he would join a drive in 2 weeks if the weather held. Thomas said he would think on it, and that he had chores that could not be handed to just anyone. Jonah tipped his hat and rode on, dust mixing with dusk. The night that followed was the kind that tests a roof. Wind dragged at the shingles. A storm line muttered to the north and then passed. Anna could not sleep. She stood at the window and watched the lantern make a small circle of gold that did not waver. Thomas's step came to the door and paused. He asked if fear was worse at night for her. She said it was. He said, "Night promises nothing, and so keeps no lies." In the dark quiet they spoke of little things. Thomas said the calf was mending and that the bay mare would be right in a week. Anna said the bread had risen quick and that the stove liked pine better than cottonwood. The talking eased them both, and when silence returned, it felt like a blanket drawn up, not like a door closing. Before dawn, Clara padded in with her blanket and lay across the foot of the bed without a word. Anna tucked the blanket around the child and watched the slow light arrive. She listened to the first rooster and the second and the third, and each one sounded less like an alarm and more like a promise that morning would come anyway. 2 weeks slid by in quiet watchfulness. The rumor of trouble thinned but did not die. Jonah Pike rode in again and said the long drive south would leave on Monday. The river was low, the beeves were set, and he had room for one steady man. Thomas walked the yard after Jonah left, eyes on the far hills. He said the ranch needed coin and salt and seed, and that the cattle pay would come sure if the weather stayed kind. He would be gone near 2 weeks. He asked if Anna could hold the days. Anna said she could, though her stomach turned like a pail in strong hands. She remembered the neat man's smile and the card with its careful letters. She pictured the gate without Thomas, the porch without his hat. She weighed flight in her mind, the old habit of vanishing, and found it heavier than staying. The house had learned her step. The dog slept by her stool. Clara's lessons leaned against her elbow each afternoon. The road did not call her name the way it used to. That night they spread the account book and a little pile of coins on the table. Thomas added and sighed and added again. Anna said she would take in washing from riders, mend shirts, bake loaves for the booth boys who ate like colts, and bring the school its fee on time. Thomas almost smiled and said that bread was the kind of news neighbors liked to hear. Clara sat straight and promised to feed the hens, gather eggs, pump water, and keep the doll on guard by the door with a spoon for a sword. Thomas touched the child's hair and said bravery was not loud and that he had seen a lot of it in this house. On Sunday they rode to the cedar hill and stood by Mary's grave. The wind moved the branches in a steady breath. Anna spoke to the woman she had never met. She said she would keep the house decent and the girl safe and the lantern trimmed. She felt stranger and kin at the same time. Thomas's face softened in a way that placed the past and the present side by side without quarrel. That evening Anna packed his bundle. She tucked 2 slices of pie at the top, a clean shirt beneath, a scrap of paper that said, "The house will be waiting." She oiled the rifle and set it near the door. In the dark, she listened to crickets test the edges of the night and told herself the days would line up and pass. Before sunrise he mounted. Clara hugged him hard and hid her face in Anna's skirt. Thomas touched his hat to Anna, a small grave salute that carried more than one meaning. He said the river would talk low by afternoon and that the trail sky was a big bowl poured above a man. He would be back by the 12th day, if luck kept its end. Anna watched his dust untie itself from the yard and drift south. Then she drew water, set bread to rise, and lifted the day with both hands. The days without Thomas learned their own beat. Anna split kindling and kept the stove sure. She washed for 2 riders and mended for a third who paid in coffee beans. Clara practiced sums with kernels of corn and sounded letters with fierce care. The dog took to sleeping at the door like a rolled rug. Each evening Anna lit the lantern early and trimmed it neat, as if a neat light could make the night think twice. On the 5th day, riders came again. Not 4, and not the neat man. 2 strangers, dust-frayed and restless, leaned on their saddles at the gate and asked for water. Anna brought a pail and a clean dipper and stood while they drank. One asked if the widower was home. Anna said he was trailing beeves south. The man looked over her shoulder toward the house and barn, measuring. He said there had been talk in town that a woman had run from a bad place and found a new name. Anna did not blink. She said there was always talk and that it did not feed cattle. The men drank, muttered thanks, and rode on with the look of men who might mention what they had seen in a place where cards lay on a table. That night Anna sat on the porch step with the rifle across her knees. The prairie made a wide hush around the house. Clara came out with the doll and sat beside her, small and serious. Anna told her that fear is a horse that needs a firm hand, and that a house can be braver than the people in it if they agree to listen. The child leaned against her and fell asleep there. the doll tucked under an arm as if it were a warm loaf. On the ninth morning, a shape rose from the southern road and resolved into a horse and a man that were known. Thomas came through the gate, hollow-eyed and sound, smelling of river and rope and sweat. He slid down and stood for a long moment, as if the ground were strange. Then he looked at Anna and then at Clara, and something eased in him in a way that could be heard. He washed at the basin without words. He ate what she set before him. After, he stood on the porch while the wind bent the grass, and said he had thought of them at night, when the coyotes sang and the stars looked like salt thrown high. He said the thought came like a hand on his back, when the river tried to take a steer. He said he did not want a house that was only memory. Anna felt the old habit in her pulse, the step back before the step forward. She told him she had run so long that running had become a kind of breath, and that stopping felt like learning to breathe again. She said she did not want to leave the girl, or the land, or the lamp that knew her touch. She said her name out loud, the new way and the old way, and let both fall quiet between them. Thomas took off his hat and turned it once in his hands. He said a man is given a life like a field, and the best thing he can do is fence it honest and work it steady and share its shade. They did not speak vows. They spoke chores. They spoke winter and seed, school and saddle, roof and stove. They let those words become their answer. Clara watched them and smiled with the round wisdom of a child who sees a road join itself. Summer leaned toward its hard, bright middle. Heat lay on the yard like a blanket set to dry. They worked side by side and fell into the habit of speaking low in the cool parts of the day. Thomas set new shingles where wind had left a gap and painted the porch rail, the kind of white that shows dust honest. Anna scrubbed the floorboards to a soft glow and hemmed curtains from a length of faded calico she found in Mary's box. She stitched without guilt, as if the past and present could share a seam. A letter came up the road in the hand of the boy who ran errands for the store. The envelope was fine and the script close. Thomas set it on the table and looked at it a long time before opening it with his pocket knife. The neat man's words lay inside, small and tidy. He wrote that he had chosen to take his business and his temper back east, where men knew his measure. He wrote that a woman who runs will surely run again, and that anyone who gives her shelter will learn sorrow. Thomas folded the letter once and slid it into the stove where the coals were sleeping. The paper curled without fuss and became a small gray moth that could not fly. After that, peace came like a shy animal, stepping nearer day by day. It did not erase what had been. It only learned to live beside it. They began to speak of a new room off the kitchen where winter light would sit soft, and of a pen for pigs if the harvest gave enough, and of a little patch of sunflowers by the fence for no reason but cheer. Clara asked if the doll could have a cradle. Thomas said the doll should file a request with the foreman and then winked, a rare foolishness that warmed the whole porch. One evening, while the sky burned low and the river talked its quiet talk, they saddled the bay and a little brown mare and rode out along the cottonwoods. The air smelled of warm mud and mint crushed under hoof. They crossed where the stones made a riffle and let the horses drink. Anna took water in her palms and let it fall back cool and bright. Thomas watched her with the same look he gave a sound fence, a straight furrow, a calf that stands quick. He reached out and rested 2 fingers at her wrist, as if the proof of her were there. She leaned closer, so that their shoulders touched and stayed like that, simple and sure. When they rode home, the lantern in the kitchen window shone like a small star. The house looked almost like the houses in stories, the kind told to children who have had good fortune. It was not that. It was a lived place, with dust in the corners and one loose board that squeaked, and a stove that liked pine better than cottonwood. It was better than stories, because it could carry a woman's true name and a man's once broken hope, and a child's laugh through deep winter and hot summer, and into whatever waited next. They put the horses up and closed the barn with a steady pull. The swallows flashed under the rafters and settled. Night stepped down from the hills and sat on the porch like a welcome guest. Clara yawned and leaned against Anna, who lifted her with the strong peace of someone who has decided. Thomas stood close, and watched the sky grow its thick salt field of stars. In that gentle dark, they chose again, without ceremony. They chose morning after morning, fence and river, bread and lantern, hill and cedar, past and present, stitched in one seam. The train would come and go, iron voice on distant rails, carrying other people's stories. This house would keep a steadier time. If the road sent trouble, it would find a gate, and a calm voice, and a pair of hands that knew how to make things right, or make them bearable. And somewhere far down the seasons, when Clara was taller and the doll sat wise on a shelf, there would be a day when a freckled boy brought flowers that looked like fallen suns. And Thomas would clear his throat and speak too much about fence posts. And Anna would laugh, the deep laugh of a woman who learned to stay. The river would go on saying what rivers say. The land would breathe its patient breath. The lantern would be trimmed at dusk, and another dusk after that, and so on as long as the fields held their lines. Dear traveler of tales, if this humble yarn warmed your evening and set the prairie wind in your thoughts, be kind enough to tip your hat and subscribe to Western Love Legends. Leave a friendly like and settle a comment by the fire so other hearts can find their way to this story's light.